Hello? Who is this?
I'm not the Zodiac. And if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
Hello and welcome to episode 33 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian, and this is...
Daniel.
Yay. Episode 33. We're moving right along.
Wait, are you sure? Didn't we do episode 33 last time?
No, we did episode 32 last time. Episode 32 was The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
No, that's probably why I'm trying to erase that from my mind.
Yeah, ironically, that fits right in with the listener feedback that we got, which was from listener Jeff Edwards. He said, "It's almost more fun when you review movies you're not crazy about. 2 thumbs up for a great podcast about a film that doesn't rate 2 thumbs up."
I like that.
Yay. And ironically, it's got 2 likes. The little Facebook likes or the thumbs up. So Jeff's post got 2 thumbs up.
Very nice.
And now I don't even want to click like to make it 3. Yeah, it makes me sad. So that does it for listener feedback. And now we discuss Zodiac, which is your movie. So I will briefly share how this got on my shelf. Quite frankly, it isn't. And to our listeners that follow us on the Facebook page, I did post a link on how to watch the movie for free on Sony Crackle. Free advertising, I guess. Speaking of advertising, about every 10 minutes at really inopportune spots, like mid-line, they will interject about 2 minutes worth of advertisements. So I really kind of wish I'd have rented it from that other streaming service that we generally use, but I thought I would give the free version a try.
No free lunch, man. You pay for it one way or the other.
Nope, exactly. And I tell you, the problem wasn't necessarily that there were commercials, because I could watch this movie on TV and see commercials and that sort of thing, but they would show the same commercial 3 times in one segment, and several times it was just the same commercial back to back, and you're staring at it going, was there a hiccup? I just watched that. And it was usually the mayhem commercials, like, I'm a 4-year-old who just figured out how to eat things.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've seen that commercial a bunch of times now, and I still don't want to buy that insurance, so...
Yeah, I think the thing that the advertisers don't realize, they say it's like, if we get our word out there more and more, then people want to buy us. But it actually has the exact opposite effect. The more you see it, the more you don't want to buy what they're selling, because you're so tired of hearing about it.
Yeah, I'm happy with my current insurance company. I didn't buy it because of the commercials, although I knew of it because of the commercials. So, there's that. But stop hitting me over the head with commercials back to back to back.
Yeah, you're not John Doe. You don't feel like you have to hit somebody over the head with a sledgehammer to get their full and complete attention.
Now I have your full and complete attention. Or in the case of Zodiac, send ciphers to the 3 major newspapers in the San Francisco area, as well as the police. And so anyway, but we'll get to that. Now, knowing that this is not on my shelf, Dan, how did this movie get on your shelf? Because you're the reason we're watching it.
Well, trying to put this delicately, I'm a big fan of serial killers.
You and a lot of other people.
I know it's a horrible thing to say, to put it that way, I suppose. I'm not oblivious to that fact. But it is a fascinating subject to study. And Zodiac just happens to be, again, for lack of a better way to put it, one of my favorite to study. Second only to Jack the Ripper. And the big thing is that they are 2 of the most notorious serial killers who have not been caught. At this point, their identities are just basically going to be speculation. unless somebody invents time travel and you can go back and actually film these acts being occurred in real time. We're never going to know who they are.
We have a much better idea of who Zodiac is, though, than Jack the Ripper, at least from this movie and from the research that I did on the internet.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, this movie, even though this is supposedly about Zodiac, I kind of saw this more as the author who wrote the book that Jake Gyllenhaal was portraying. And it's about his experiences and his obsession with trying to find out who the Zodiac is. And subsequently, you writing his book at the cost of nearly his family and his sanity and everything, which is amazing because I've read that book. And it was featured at the end of the movie at the airport bookstore and everything. I was like, oh yeah, I have read that book. And that's the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, I had no idea that this was about that.
The guy that wrote this book.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on your shelf because you have a fascination with this particular serial killer. And Jack the Ripper.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Like everything else I own on my shelves, it's a very good movie. I mean, I've seen a lot of movies that were quote unquote based on true events, and a lot of them fall short. But this one did a pretty good job.
I think it was pretty true to what real life might be like. Especially in the very late 60s, early 70s, and then into the 80s. So,
yeah.
Now that we know how it got on your shelf, let's segment into actually talking about it, which we already were, so...
Okay.
Well, because this leads me to a question. Do you think that this movie did a good job of setting the period, as in the late 60s, very late 60s, early 70s?
That's actually one of the first things I jotted down notes on. We have discussed this before of the show me versus tell me. And I think the first opening sequence where the camera point of view is from the driver's side, looking out the window, passing all these houses, and you see it's nighttime, there's still fireworks going off, you see people cleaning up after a barbecue, one guy's dumping out an ice chest, people are still celebrating. Unless you're not familiar with American culture, you pretty much already know, 4th of July, this is it, barbecues, fireworks, hot summer night, even for San Francisco.
And once you look at the car, you figure out it's not current. It's definitely a while ago, even if you don't know what cars are by the look.
I think even more so than the cars, and I say this even more so than cars and how people dress, because, I mean, especially nowadays, a lot of people like to do retro, a lot of people like classic cars, a lot of people like classic dress and everything. And I'm not saying that people don't like listening to classic music, but when you put it in the context of a film in the soundtrack, the music really takes you back more than any of the scenery does, at least in my opinion. They play that music and, you've heard people say, oh, it doesn't matter where they're at. They hear music from a certain time period, especially if they lived through it, and they're like, oh, that takes me back. And I think that in doing so really set the tone of, yeah, this is late 60s, early 70s. We're in the time period. And it's especially difficult, too, when you have well-known actors like Jake Gyllenhaal, like Robert Downey Jr., and Mark Ruffalo. It's like, okay, well, there's Iron Man and the Hulk in this. If it wasn't for the soundtrack, I'd have a hard time putting this in the early 70s because they're so well-known for contemporary times.
I will say that in my notes, I actually wrote down that the music, the soundtrack, is like a fifth character in this movie. Or it's an extra character. It really does put you in the era. I mean, I was born in 1970, so I totally missed the 60s and really, for all intents and purposes, missed most of the 70s because I was not cognizant of my surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the music, from what I have envisioned that decade as, put me in that headspace. So it was actually really well done and well woven into the fabric of the story, as opposed to getting all up in your face and punctuating a point. It was mostly pretty mellow, and it was just kind of like, yeah, hey, look, it's the 60s, it's the 70s. So I thought the music was great. I think one of the things that drives it home for me is, particularly in the San Francisco Chronicle newsroom, was the open desks. Again, I never worked in a newsroom, but that's sort of always what I envisioned it to be in my head. So I think they did a great job of that, at least for setting the scene piece and the era. Everyone had typewriters. They were smoking in the office, not even like in a small room. It was like, yeah, whatever, we're out here typing away and we're smoking. So again, that shows the era, that this is a bygone day. The hairstyles were good. You talked about Bruce Banner, or the Hulk and Iron Man being in this movie. Ironically, Jake Gyllenhaal has been cast as Mysterio for the next Spider-Man movie.
Oh, do tell. That's news to me.
Spoilers for the next Spider-Man movie, because he died in Avengers Infinity War, or he disappeared with the snap. Yeah, hey, look, Tom Holland's under contract for 6 movies. I'm pretty sure they didn't go, yeah, we were only kidding about that. You only have to do this when you're done. So I think he's coming back.
Cool. No, but to kind of respond to, you're just saying that you've never been in a newspaper room and everything, but you are correct in the saying that they did a pretty good job of recreating a newspaper office, so to say, because if you look at movies, the first one that comes to mind was the 1976 All the President's Men with Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. There are a lot of scenes in a newsroom, not too dissimilar. So you reference movies that were from the 70s, and you can say that, yeah, somebody did their homework and they did a really competent job of recreating the 70s in that sense, at least the visual.
Yeah, I agree.
But like I said, it's like when you have contemporary actors, especially when they're well known, you do have a hard time taking people back to that era, because you can look at the scenery, you can look at, but once the actors get, and to bring up another example to just show you how it doesn't work for me, was the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay.
Where it's supposed to take place in mid-late 70s, as the original did. I liked it. It was a pretty well-made movie, but again, I wasn't transported back to the 70s because the actors, I think they fell short with the costumes and just the way that they did up their makeup and hair and everything, and I didn't see that and think 70s, so I just looked at it as just a horror movie, not necessarily a period piece. This movie did a little better job, but like I said, the soundtrack really helped it along.
One of the things that always helps the movie stay in era, we'll use Jake Gyllenhaal's Graysmith's eventual wife. When she shows up, she's got the big 70s glasses on, and a butterfly collar, and again, the clothing, you could say that it's making a comeback, but the movie kind of had that almost grainy 70s feel to it. Like, it wasn't shot on digital, it was shot on actual film, and still had that kind of, I don't want to say home movie feel to it, but if you know what I'm talking about, there's a little bit of a difference between something that's crisp and high definition and made for 3D, and then that just little grainy feeling that kind of gives you an aged feel to the movie. But so I kind of want to go back for a minute and talk about the actors in this movie, and we've mentioned Jake Gyllenhaal, we mentioned Mark Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr., and you had said that they're big name actors. So I want to ask the question, they are well-known names now, especially as you mentioned, the things that we specifically look at them for nowadays. But in 2007, could you say the same thing? I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was kind of on the comeback, but it wasn't really until 2008 when Iron Man came out that he was really reintroduced back in the world, at least in my mind. Mark Ruffalo, honestly, I didn't really know who he was until he stepped into the role of Bruce Banner in Avengers. Now, Jake Gyllenhaal, I've seen him in a lot of things, and I really like his movies, and one of the things that I will applaud him for is he seems to do a lot of movies that are not blockbusters. It's almost like he's doing it, for the art instead of to make a buck, which I appreciate and respect.
He's done a blockbuster or two. They just weren't good ones. What was that disaster movie he was in where it was like, the whole global warming thing? What was the name of it?
Was he in Geostorm? Was that it?
I don't know if it was called Geostorm. No, it wasn't that one. And
God, I hope not.
Like the next day or day after tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. He was Dennis Quaid's son.
Yeah.
I kind of forgotten about that.
Before this, he was in Jarhead, Brokeback Mountain. So, he had a name for himself.
Yeah, but, okay, so Brokeback Mountain, aside from the obvious subject matter, we would call that, I think, his biggest film to that date. to 2007. He's been in a few recently, but would you say that in 2007 he was what you would call a big draw?
I don't know. I don't know if I would. You know, I mean, he was known. He's got that face that everybody knew. Yeah, I don't know if I'd put him on a Tom Cruise status. I see the point you're making and everything, and it's like, yeah, I guess right now I'm kind of judging it based on the viewing that I did for this particular podcast or anything. So, but, you know, that's the thing too. I mean, when we have this podcast and we expose this movie to people who may not have watched it, you know, they're going to be watching it today, and yeah, they're going to see these names, you know. It's like, but the other names, of course, was Anthony Edwards. He was pretty big.
Yeah, he was Goose.
Yeah, you know, and I was going to say ER, but according to this, he did, well, no, from 1994.
No, he was in ER.
Yeah, 1994. So, yeah, I mean, he's pretty well known. So, depending on what time and, you know, maybe not the actors that I cited, but, you know, there are actors in this movie that were pretty well known and that people look at and it's like, yeah, person from my time. I still stand behind the fact that their presence would make it a little more difficult to try to take you back to the time period that they're portraying because they are relatively known.
I will agree. I just, from the standpoint of 2007, they weren't exactly well-known actors. Or, well, Robert Downey Jr. was. I mean, I give him that because he had gone into rehab and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, nowadays, yeah, I was stunned. I'm like, I started watching it, and I think you and I had discussed this earlier prior to the recording, that I had completely forgotten that Mark Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr. were in this movie. I knew Jake Gyllenhaal was, and I was kind of prepared for that, but the first appearance was like, oh hell, all right, okay, I'm good.
I do got to say too, it's like you mentioned Chloe Sevigny's part. I think she was the only character who really kind of had that 70s look, the big rimmed glasses and just the straight hair that just, I don't want to say no style, because I mean that definitely is a style, but you know, just not all poofed out like you see nowadays or anything. She just, that to me was a 70s look.
Absolutely. And I don't know that Robert Downey Jr.'s character really had a specific 70s look. I mean, he just had longer hair and a goatee. And since that is making a comeback as kind of a thing, you're like, well, I mean, he could have really been anywhere, just a guy with his own style. But you put him in the era, like I said, in the newsroom, and even some of the bars and that sort of thing, it really did speak to the 70s. And they did a great job with the cars, although, point of note, while I was doing some research, someone had pointed out that, that was a 1971 blah, 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 in October of 70. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I didn't care. I mean, there's only so many, pre-70s cars running around that you can use on set. So if they used one from a year later, I'll get over it.
And hey, you know what? Close enough. You know, I'm willing. You know, it's like we say, the willful suspension disbelief and everything. And in that case, yeah, I get it. You want to be detailed, and I totally am not going to badmouth you for that. But at the same time, close enough.
Yeah, and it didn't pull me out of the movie because I would be willing to bet that was one of a very small number of people that actually noticed that, and they still watched it. And from the review that I read where they pointed that out, they said, it was still a good movie. Yeah, that just, it was, the car was wrong. Like, okay.
Okay, no problem.
You're entitled to do you. So, just to kind of preface this a little bit more while we're still talking about actors, or at least to set this up, I'm personally kind of front-loading some of my material on the actors and the music and the scene, because I'm really saving some conversation after that for the actual Zodiac killer himself. And I want to address the thing that you had sort of opened with, is your fascination with serial killers. So moving to that, not necessarily, but the actor that played Arthur Lee, I have seen him in so many things, and he's one of those great character actors that just gets into a part and you don't really notice him in a lot of movies. But he was in
Gothica.
Yeah, he was in Gothica. He was in the Anchorman movies. He's been in a lot of stuff. I mean, just scrolling through his IMDb page, he's that guy that just shows up in different things, and you're like, didn't even know it was him.
Yeah, he had a small part in The Walking Dead. He played a relatively good character, not necessarily a bad guy. which, a lot of movies that I've seen him in, he plays, the killer. But, yeah, he was a very pacifistic and wise man in The Walking Dead.
I like everything I've seen him in, so I just wanted to bring that up. I did like Chloe Sevigny. I thought she did a great job in the role. As little as she was actually given, I mean, she was there to push Gyllenhaal's character to finish the book. And while we're on that, talking about the family thing, so if I understood the end of the movie correctly, Graysmith had actually gotten a divorce and he was just in touch with his kids, right? So this book did cost him his family, or his wife anyway.
Yeah, he did. It did say that he had a good relationship with his kids, but I guess he didn't say his family or his wife. So yeah, I just kind of glazed over that part and just thought, yeah, okay, he finished the book and he got on with his life.
I think that's the fundamental theme of this movie is obsession. That was kind of a weird segue, but he was obsessed.
As were Mark Ruffalo's character, the David Toshi and Paul Avery. These things that ultimately destroyed their careers and their lives. It's like, the whole time I was watching this movie, it just always made me think of, and forgive me if this isn't if it wasn't Nietzsche, but I it's one of those things is be careful who you quote because sometimes they didn't quote it. But it's just like you take care when battling monsters that one doesn't become one yourself. That's kind of what you see happening here.
Yeah, exactly. They let the monster overcome them. There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach you about the raising of the wrist. Sorry. Old Monty Python Philosopher's Song. Are you familiar with that?
Uh-huh.
Listeners, if you have a chance, go listen to the Monty Python Philosopher's Song. It actually covers a lot of famous philosophers throughout history, and they all drink. So, but yeah, I agree with you, and that was actually one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about. Do you think that anyone handled it well? For example, Paul Avery, he started drinking and getting high. Robert Graysmith, he lost his wife, but he got a little wild-eyed. I mean, especially when you see the files and everything that were in the apartment after his wife left him. That was a little nuts. He kind of had to get that monkey off of his back and finish the book before he could move on and be a healthy and whole person. Mark Ruffalo's character, I think the only thing that he really obsessed about was not necessarily the killer, but the unsolved crime and how he wanted to finish the job. The only character of we'll call them the four mains, the three that I mentioned, the only character that got out was Anthony Edwards, and he was like, I just can't do this anymore. I can't keep chasing the same ghost, if you will.
Well, the thing is, like, I don't know if you can really say that this was the case that destroyed him in the sense that they were fine to begin with. I mean, already, again, it's this whole thing of show me instead of tell me. I mean, we already saw that Graysmith, Jake Gyllenhaal's role, was already a divorcee. He was a single parent. He was taking care of his kid by himself. You saw that he was a little flighty. He was kind of forgetting things or not paying attention to his environment. So this case was probably the thing that put him over the edge. As the Joker said in The Dark Knight, sometimes just people need just a little push. And that's what this case was. It was the little push that put him over the edge. And that's the same with Robert Downey Jr. He was already a drinker. He hung out with the guys at the bar. It's like you saw that it was a regular thing. When he said, I forget the name of the bar. Hey, meet me at there, everything. So this was a regular thing. So it's not like these guys were clean to start with. All it took was a little push of this case that put him over the edge.
I think they were different scales, though, because Paul Avery never really recovered. Once he went down the rabbit hole and he was worried about getting killed or whatnot, he was gone.
That's what, going over the edge means. I mean,
Right. No, but my point is, to slightly counter what you're saying, Paul Avery went over the edge. Jake Gyllenhaal went to the edge, teetered over for a little bit, but once he finished the book, at least according to the print on the screen, he recovered nicely and he went back to being a reasonably normal person. His obsession was over and he'd gotten the monkey off his back. Mark Ruffalo's character, the only thing that really ruined his career, because he moved on to other things, he was still doing work. Although when they show him sitting in the car at Washington and Cherry for years, that's how they show his level of obsession. But he doesn't let it get to him. He gets accused of something that he didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's levels of that good push, and the two of them were actually able to pull up out of the tailspin. The only one who really wasn't, at least in this movie, and I don't know what happened in real life, was Paul Avery.
Isn't it too bad that Anthony Edwards was able to recover from this tailspin, but the one in Top Gun
Oh
killed him?
no! I can't believe you went there. No. Oh,
You're the one who said tailspin. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, but I wasn't trying to lead you into that.
Yeah, well, you know what?
Yeah, well, too late.
Road to hell paved with the best intentions,
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, that's bad.
But, it's funny, and Nina brought this up, too. This situation putting these people in these really difficult spots in their lives and everything. And like I said, Nina brought this up. Doesn't it Jake Gyllenhaal look like somebody who just always gets put in really bad situations? He has that face like, I really don't want to be here, but okay, I'm going to deal with it. I mean, Day After Tomorrow, he kind of had that face. He had that face in Donnie Darko. He's got this face here. It's like, I just don't want to be here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I haven't seen everything he's been in, so I will say in this movie, he does pull off Obsessed pretty well, because he really does look like he wants... he kind of looks like he doesn't want to be there, but...
He's stuck.
I think... Yeah, but he's stuck. He's like, I have to get through this. I have to figure this out. Mm-hmm. And he even says it. I love puzzles. I just can't let this one go. I have to understand it.
Yeah, which brings me to the next point. And again, we're kind of keep going on this thing about show me. And I go back to initially what I said, that, it's like movies that they say that try to claim that they're based on historical events.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they fall short. Of course, like, I got to bring up an example of one that really fell short, was like Braveheart, Oh, based on a true story. Yeah, but you did a really crappy job in portraying it. Everything. And then you got movies like the one we talked about, Ghost in the Darkness, which did a fair job of depicting historical facts, a little bit of embellishment here and there. And then I got to think of, movie 300 that never even claimed to be based on true events.
Like, yeah, there was a thing that happened.
Yeah, it was a fantasy, it's like it was based on a graphic novel and everything. But some of the little details you look at, it's like, yeah, that actually happened. It's neat that they included that, even though they're not claiming to be based on a true story, and that there's definite embellishment and everything. So with a case as so nuanced as the Zodiac case, and there was so much involved in it, they did a really good job of portraying the killings as described in crime scene reports and eyewitness accounts. Just touching on the nobody couple. There were teachers who decided, hey, let's take a crack at the code. And they broke it when the CIA and the Navy intelligence and nobody else could. They did. And coming full circle to what started is Jake Gyllenhaal's portrayal of obsession, where, again, these little nothing scenes where he's showing, they're talking about, the killings that occurred during the solstices, or have you ever noticed that the killings occur somewhere near water? These were actual theories that people tried to put forth, that really didn't help, didn't really do anything for the case, didn't help solve it or anything like that. But they were very famous. In fact, my first exposure to the Zodiac case was people talking about radiant angles and engineering and looking at it on the map. And I believe it was the Mount Diablo theory that people had. They put his Zodiac symbol on top of Mount Diablo, which is near the Bay Area, and one of his letters, it had several X's on the outer circle of the Zodiac symbol that he used for his signature, so to say. Mm-hmm. And somebody said that, that has something to do with radiant angles, which is like an engineering tool, and said that each of them points to a killing.
I was unaware of that.
Well, it's because it kind of fell out of favor, because it's like afterwards, it's like, this really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really help. But, again, they touched on it, especially, like I said, with the scenes showing Graysmith's obsession and touching on everything. And it's good that they included all that, it portrayed, shown in his obsession, because these were all part of the Zodiac case. That's all part of the mystique. And without just telling me, they showed me.
I agree with you because not knowing about the Radians from Diablo Mountain or Mount Diablo, I had heard about the water theory and that sort of thing before, and I also ran across it in my research. But not that it's particularly new to any serial killer case, especially one that goes on that long. This one has a particular fascination. Again, I think for the same reason that you had said earlier, is because they never really caught the Zodiac killer. There's some pretty heavy theories about who he is, and what's in the movie really sort of bear out why they think that's the person that it is.
Mm-hmm.
But Jake Gyllenhaal did a really great job of standing in for the audience as every serial killer fan and pushing forth the theory. So I agree with you, and I think the way they brought it out in the movie without just bringing other nut jobs or reading like 67 random letters, or they could have had an interlude where they said, blah, blah, blah. Over the time, the police received 6,822 different tips. One panned out, or whatever, something like that. I thought him doing it and relaying that was pretty awesome. And then that led to going down to the archives for the Sacramento Bee and finding the Zodiac watch ad, or at least that reveal during that scene. So it gave, from a movie making standpoint, I don't know if it played out that way in real life, but it gave them a way to incorporate all those fan theories.
Yeah, it told the story, like I said, with a story that has so many facets to it, to one line of storytelling.
Right.
It gave us so much in just those short little scenes.
And it gave us consistency, too, so you didn't have to keep introducing characters that didn't matter.
Exactly.
Or that weren't going to die. So it seemed like, I could be wrong, but every character that was introduced along the way that wasn't somehow related to the main through line died, except for the random photos of Navy code breakers and the couple, the married couple that actually ended up cracking the code first. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah.
And real, too, so there's that.
Yeah, so like I again, whoever did the research to make this movie at least look accurate really did their homework. Again, being such a fan, it's like, again, the car guy, who says, oh, that car wasn't from 1970, it's from 71 and everything. Again, being a fan of serial killer cases and everything, yeah, I was totally ready to tear apart this movie, but it's like, I think they did pretty good. And what little things that didn't quite pan out, it was just like, close enough.
Fair enough. According to IMDb, the writing credits, so as far as the research, Robert Graysmith obviously wrote the book, and James Vanderbilt wrote the screenplay, so it would appear as though, and I could be wrong, I could be reading this entirely incorrectly, it appears that they collaborated to get the facts right. And since the movie is about Robert Graysmith and his research for the book, it stands to reason that they would use him as a resource and go, hey, does this fit your recollection or not? Again, I think, like I said, everyone did a great job acting in this movie. I'll be honest, I don't recall ever actually watching this movie from beginning to end all the way through. I know I've seen most of it. I thought I'd seen all of it, but there's some scenes that I was surprised by, in the sense that, like, oh, I don't think I've ever seen this scene before. Okay, cool. But this movie was not something that you could jump right into. So I kind of feel bad about watching it in bits and pieces and dribs and drabs before, because I actually found it far more enjoyable watching it all the way through. It's like reading a book.
Yeah.
Don't start at chapter 7.
Yeah.
Start at chapter 1, or the preface.
So, that being said, talking about beginning to end, though, what do you think, though, about starting the movie at his second killing and not his first?
I didn't really have a problem with it because I didn't think that we needed to see all of the killings, and we didn't. And I think that going with the first one where the guy survived gives you a through line to the end of the movie when he identifies Arthur Lee.
And that's the point I was going to make. I think,
Yeah.
as much as I love the accuracy and completeness that this movie portrayed of the Zodiac case, the fact that they skipped the first one because that first survivor became, like, what's the word I'm looking for? The keystone, so to say, or the final epilogue.
Yeah, he was an important piece
at the very end to finger Arthur Lee and say, yeah, it was him. And to be like that final, like, oh snap at the end of the movie, It's like,
son of a
it's
old man Witherspoon.
And I would have got away with it too with a few meddling kids.
Ironically, John Carroll Lynch could play Old Man Witherspoon in a Scooby-Doo live-action movie. Just throwing that out there.
Okay.
He has that presence. He's rather like the Kevin Spacey of old before Kevin Spacey got really big and then, disappeared from view because of some other crap.
So there's two now that we've had. We've had two references to Seven, and so I got to bring it up. A little bit of a atmosphere of Seven in this movie.
Yeah, but not as dark.
No, this one was more of an interesting history lesson, whereas Seven was a bit of a fantasy tale. Obviously Seven was fiction, but there was a lot of it that was just, again, very... It made a connection. There's some genetic connection there.
Oh, I agree, because they're both serial killer movies. They're both about the chasing of a serial killer as opposed to just the story of... It's not like watching Dexter where, you see him do things all the time. This was the investigation, the process, the obsession.
The hunters becoming the hunted.
Yeah. And really, did Paul Avery ever really get hunted? It was more of a blanket threat that just sort of hung there in the air.
No, I was actually talking more of a Graysmith's character where
with the phone calls and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the phone calls, the actual the visceral fear. Oh, and to go back to the scene with Bob Vaughn, the movie theater owner, was he owner?
Yes, I believe he was.
Yeah, you went in that scene, when he's going, it's like, no, these were done. It's like no, I do the handwriting, and and everything just went silent,
That was a well played piece of suspense.
It turned from a historical drama into a horror movie at that point. And then the thing is, it's like, it's in the basement. It's like, never many houses here have basements. I do.
Yeah, which was a callback to one of the lines where someone had said he's keeping her in his basement. Mm-hmm. So it was well played. Chekhov's basement. How about that? But that was, according to Graysmith, that was not embellished. That was the way he actually felt during that moment. He said it was as close to the real thing as he had seen, and that he did hear steps upstairs, and he was like, I gotta go now. And, he rolled out and left.
Yeah, and this is the thing. Remember I said that I didn't know that this was based on the book, until at the end of the movie, the first time I saw this and everything. So, yeah, I had no idea that, is he going to get out of this alive, or is this where he dies? Is this, I had no ideas.
Is the rest of the movie going to be epilogue? What are we doing here?
And again, much credit to the actor, Charles Fleischer. He's, credit to his craft, man. He's a creepy looking dude.
There's looks, but you could be a lovable, huggable Mogwai and still look creepy. And this guy pulls it off quite well. And not just with the appearance, but the body language and the tone in his voice. Oh, they're just down in the basement. It's that eerie, like, nobody really talks like that. Maybe you could talk like a normal human for a minute. That would be great.
Crazy thing, though, looking at his IMDb, he was the voice of Benny the Cab in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh, see, again, could be a total lovable, huggable Mogwai or cab. I don't know, but he was a little scary. He could be a little scary.
You know.
But going to, again, the characters that could be, or rather character actors that can be imposing or a little, like, harmless nuts, I guess, is Lee's character, Arthur Lee Allen's character, or not his character. Arthur Lee Allen is the character. John Carroll Lynch. Going back to him for just a minute, when they go interview Arthur Lee Allen in the factory or wherever that is on the lunch break, his demeanor and mannerisms, I wasn't sure if that was the guy because, again, I haven't researched the Zodiac Killer probably as much as you have, so I'm sure you recognize the names and stuff like that. I had that whole, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure this is your guy, and I think that's what you're supposed to get out of that scene and out of that movie.
Yeah.
But he had a special sort of sinister delight in the, oh, I really wish I could help you. I do. Wow, he sounds like a really smart man. It's sort of that backhanded flattery of yourself. But there's also that, oh good, now I know you're looking for me. Now I know I need to, do things a little bit different. But he conveyed that in his acting. It wasn't so much like the lines that were delivered, but the delivery of the lines. So I really appreciated and respected that.
Yeah, sometimes you say things and it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I agree. Can't really say anything to that.
Nope, I got no. You'll brook no argument from me, laddie book.
No, I'm much credit to his craft. In every serial killer case, there's that moment when you pretty much, you got your guy. And there's a variety of ways that these things go down. I mean, in my time, we had the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. And the police had an idea who he was. That was their suspect. Okay, it was enough to not just go question him to say, okay, we're going to find him, we're going to arrest him, and then we're going to get it out of him and everything. But pretty sure it's him. And it was a matter of finding him. So the hunt was on, and it's like, when you hear the story told right, it was literally a chase. He was trying to get out of town. The police were after him. They knew his face. They just had to find him.
They were driving down the road chasing a white Bronco.
No, wrong one. But, kind of funny story behind that, though. It's like the citizens found him first. And he actually needed the police to save his life because the people in that area were not really too pleased with his existence and tried to end it. So it was actually the police that saved his life in that case. But in this particular portrayal, you had to deal with it really delicately. You think it's this guy, but you're not sure. You don't have evidence. Everything that they have is circumstantial evidence, nothing to really pin on them. So you don't want to spook them away. You got to choose your questions carefully and everything. And that little cat and mouse dialogue that they had going, again, I get credit to, Arthur Lee's actor. Just like you said, that little backhanded self-flattery and the responses and everything. And it's like, yeah, okay, we'll just, what about this? What about that? Oh, really? What,
Yeah, and it was interesting because, like you had said, the cat and mouse of the questions, the conversation that was had before they walked in was like, okay, who wants to start? Who's going to ask the questions? I mean, they prepped that beforehand. Now, in a movie, they do it much quicker than I would assume they do it in real life. I'm sure they have a standard list of questions, but I'm sure there's a certain part of, after watching enough live police interviews on crime TV or this, that, and the other thing, there's a certain degree of reading the room, if you will.
I think the preparation would be done way ahead of time, other than just, okay, here we're walking in blind. Let's get this straight now. It's like,
Right. And I think it's more of an experience thing as you move along as to who's going to do what. And I think that's why Mark Ruffalo and Anthony Edwards worked really well together as partners, because you could see without being told that they already had a bond. Like Animal Crackers, they're in the glove box. They already had a relationship. They already had a rapport, and they didn't beat you over the head with it. It was just a thing that existed. Before we go too much farther, I would like to apologize to our listeners. I incorrectly stated that John Carroll Lynch was in Anchorman. I have him confused with someone else. He was not in Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, although he does look very much like the actor that was. So.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you're absolutely right. I wasn't even thinking. They do look similar.
Yeah. So, again, my apologies, listeners. I will correct my mistake.
Yeah, well, it happens. It happens, but it's good that you recognize it and we correct it.
Yep. Well, that's what we do.
But you know what? I gotta say, though, in response to that, does that not show that his face is such a everyman's face, so common and nondescript, that, you made that mistake? And doesn't that just kind of drive your point home a little further?
Yeah, actually it does. And the fact that he is, I don't want to say invisible in a negative sense, but he's the guy you're like, oh, it's that guy. I like I like that guy in movies. So
Hey, hey, silver lining,
yes, yay, silver
Silver
lining.
lining.
I was going to say, speaking of silver linings and things that are interesting in movies, the silver lining to the Zodiac Killer was it served as the inspiration for the Dirty Harry movie
Which
that was featured in the movie. I was like, that's funny. I chuckled. It was put there for its relevance because it was the inspiration, and it was also there because it was amusing. So.
Yeah, and though, this viewing for preparation for this recording, it actually kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable. Almost like a tasteless joke in a bad time, it seemed. At least to me.
Yeah, okay, sure, Goose ejecting. Yeah, thanks. You do recognize bad jokes and bad taste at the wrong time. So, yeah, well, I'll give you that one.
Yeah, and again, I hate to keep beating a dead horse. I got this little side note jotted down on my notes here, too, was another reference to the movie Seven. There was a scene when we were talking about Grace Smith's obsession, and he talked about code books. They were in the diner. He was talking with Tashi about code books and everything like that. And it's like, yeah, but who else is reading it? And I'm like, oh, if only they used that technique from Seven. And then he mentioned, it's like, yeah, there's a list of people who actually check out these books. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, I guess that was a thing. And it's like, and it was like, wow, it's been a long time since I've seen the movie. I totally forgot that was in there.
So, I'm curious, and I haven't read the book, but I wonder if the writer of Seven read Zodiac or had researched Zodiac as an example of a serial killer that he could use parts of for Kevin Spacey's character, because that folds in quite nicely, although it's not outside the realm of possibility that two humans could come up with the same idea independently of each other.
It would not surprise me if he did. Again, Zodiac is one of those cases that inspires a lot of fiction writers. I mean, like you said, it inspired Dirty Harry. It would not surprise me if it inspired Seven to some degree. I'm sure
it did. It may not have been a direct correlation from the case to the screen, but
you did have a killer who exhibited a high level of intelligence, one that liked to taunt the police. He took interest in somebody, at least to some degree.
Yeah, there was a certain part of it that was decidedly parallel in both movies, when, like you said, the book scene, the use of the library, and even the use of the library, because Morgan Freeman goes to the library and does his research. Mm-hmm. Gray Smith goes to the library to get his books. You don't see him actually there.
But yeah, it's there. There's the implication that the library plays a very prominent feature.
Right, absolutely. And because they even mention it twice. Mm-hmm. Where did you... I went to the library. Thunk, thunk. And plunks the books down. So from that standpoint, I'm pretty sure that the writer of Seven got a lot of his inspiration from the Zodiac.
Mm-hmm. Really quick to jump in too, it's like, again, another side note here was a reference to a singular book that was cause for inspiration. In Seven, it was Dante's Inferno. In this, it was The Most Dangerous Game.
Yeah, or a movie in this case, but yeah.
Yeah, the movie, but, it's like, have you ever read the book?
No, actually, I have not.
It's a little more interesting than the movie, I think, because it's been a long time since I've seen the movie, and it's one of those things like, I guess I gotta watch it again, but, it's a little different. You have an actress in there, it becomes like a couple's thing, the victim, so to say, whereas in the book, it was a singular character who was running from the hunter. So, a little bit of differences. I like the book a little better.
Okay, fair enough. But yes, I agree, going back to the parallels with Seven, the interesting, or rather the more interesting question in my mind is, did Seven serve as the inspiration to include those scenes in this movie, as opposed to did the Zodiac book and case itself serve to influence the Seven movie? Because this movie came out in 2007, well after Seven came out. So I wonder if they included that stuff in there as a, I don't want to say tip of the hat, but a hey, we're based on a true story, based on real events, and this was how this guy got here, so while this movie comes afterwards, we did it first. And it's a tried and true movie storytelling device.
It's an interesting hypothesis that inspiration inspired inspiration.
Yeah, well, it feeds on each other, so I wouldn't be surprised. Again, Hollywood does tend to repeat itself, if you will.
It just makes me think of that line from David Lynch's Dune. I've hear plans within plans.
Within plans.
Within plans.
Oh, and don't forget to milk the cat. Anyway.
Yeah, I only bring that up too because I've gone through like my little cycles of obsessions. I'm kind of obsessed with Dune lately, so totally unrelated to the discussion, but yeah.
Well, not for nothing, that is on the list. So
yeah, maybe one day.
Not a movie that's on my shelf, but a complete sidebar. Speaking of Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, have you ever read the book The White Plague?
I started to, and I never finished it. And I'd really like to. I know the basic premise.
It's a really interesting book. I don't recall if they ever tried to make a movie from it, but basically it was set in the 70s during the Troubles, we'll call them. Well, not we. When I say we, I mean the British and the Irish and a few other folks. But a biochemist or a molecular biologist's wife and daughter are killed by the Irish in a car bomb in London. So he genetically engineers, before genetically engineering was really the thing that we have now, a disease, a biological agent that attacks only women, and he releases it in Ireland, thinking that the island itself would keep it contained. But it's an interesting plot. It's an interesting story. I definitely enjoyed the read. But it's one of Frank Herbert's less well-known works. Sorry, you started talking about Dune, and every time I talk about Dune, I think about Frank Herbert, and whenever I think about Frank Herbert, I think about that book.
Like I said, I started, and I just never got to finishing it.
Yeah, I scoured used bookstores looking for that, for a paperback of that. I read that in high school. I don't know. Sometimes you gotta go find that book, you know what I'm saying? Speaking of books, I would actually like to read the Zodiac book. Like you, I too find serial killers fascinating. Perhaps not to the same level, but if you have wrapped up most of your conversations about the movie itself, I would kind of like to move on to discussing the Zodiac Killer.
You know, a couple of things that I'd really like to just kind of bring up. You know, again, nostalgia that this movie brought up. Dean and I were big fans of San Francisco. You know, we love going there. And, you know, one of the more iconic buildings is the Transamerica Pyramid. Mm-hmm. And to show that, and an occasional segue in its progression of it being built, it's one of those, what am I looking for? Just to say, yeah, that's a way to show the passage of time rather than just tell me 10 years later. No, you showed me the building of this iconic piece of architecture that did more to show the passage of time better than anything else, I think. The other thing that I put like in 3 explanation points was that when they were on the airplane, I forget where they were going, but you know, it's like they were on PSA. And man, I love that airline. You know, the plane with a smile on the front. You know, it's like, oh, I remember that. You know, that just gave me a big smile when I was watching the movie. So, but you know, one last thing before we get to like I said, talking about the actual case, the scenes early on where they had the voiceovers of the radio talk show and people calling in and giving their speculations and everything. You know, I could not help but think that, wow, that's proto-social media right there. That's the primordial ooze of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little more organized, I guess, because at the very least, the producers could screen the calls and go, okay, this one will be good for entertainment. This one sounds, you know, pretty solid. And yeah, we're not listening to this crackpot number 1, crackpot number 10.
And even the ones that did get through, the DJ would be like, yeah, okay, whatever, click and move on.
Right. So it at least gave that opportunity to go, yeah, you don't get any more of my airtime. Thank you very much. But I will say that I agree. It is the protoplasm, the evolutionary beginnings of social media and interacting with the entertainment medium. Because, I mean, let's face it, television in its infancy, you couldn't really interact with. And it wasn't until they were able to start doing live broadcasts and answer the phones that it became a thing you could do. And from there, it was off to the races. They just got more and more live shows.
Yeah.
And then they would get live people on shows, like normal people.
There was a neat little scene when they tried to get the Zodiac to call into the TV show. I have never seen if that actually got recorded, if that was an actual thing. Granted, I haven't really deeply searched for it, but I'd like, that's something I probably should do after we finish this, is I look to see if they have the actual recordings of that. Because it sounded really interesting, you know. And when he did that little scream thing, you know, I can imagine back in that day, the people would have just been like, oh, what was that? He's possessed or whatever, you know. But
Yes, absolutely.
But on top of that, too, that again, being such a lover of the city of San Francisco, when he said, try to get him to meet you at the St. Mary's Church by Chinatown, and I was like, I know where that is! We've been there!
That always feels good when you know about things. Speaking of serial killers and serial killer movies, I think I've mentioned this before, but part of the reason that I like Hannibal, the movie, is because it's set in Florence for a time, and I've actually been there, and so I was like, ooh, I've been there. Oh, I didn't get to go there. I didn't have enough time, but I've been there. So I completely understand your excitement about that. Now, going back to moving on, one of the things that I kind of wanted to discuss before we did move on, and that was the state of cynicism regarding the press at the time, which isn't too far out of whack from where we are right now. I think it's gotten a little more extreme, but there was still a strong degree of, oh, yeah, they're just printing that because it bleeds. If it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
That saying has been around for decades. It's not new. But the way they presented the editorial decision to put the Zodiac Killer's cipher on page 4 instead of on the front page, even though there were potentially lives at stake, was both intriguing and reeked of cynicism at the same time. I'm sure that's actually what happened. They probably had that discussion, but it was curious to see the expounding on why they would do such a thing. Like, well, what's the Chronicle doing? Or what's the Tribune doing? Or, you know, where are they going with it? We don't want to get scooped. And it becomes less about trying to put out news or make sure no one dies, maybe taking some personal responsibility, and more about, you know, we don't want the other person to beat us to this story or whatnot. There was a lot of cynicism in that. When they interviewed Mark Ruffalo's character, you know, Inspector Tachi, there were a couple of times he's like, yeah, you know what, every time the press does this, they quote me out of context, or they do something. We don't discuss ongoing investigations, blah, 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 blah. Nothing particularly new, and yet in this day and age, people still act like it's a thing that is brand spanking new. What? What do you mean you don't talk about ongoing investigations? Like, yeah, we haven't done that for decades. It's kind of a thing. It's not particularly new. Just because it's new to you does not mean it's not standard operating procedure. So I thought that was an interesting look at the newspaper industry. And for someone who at one point in his life wanted to become a journalist, I enjoyed that little sneak peek into the rough and tumble, not so much, you know, physically, but the actual businessy aspects and the considerations that go into what's going to push a story to the front page or to the back of page 7. Did I ever tell you that I wanted to be a journalist?
I don't think you have. I think this is news to me.
When I first joined the Navy and I went to MEPS, for our listeners, MEPS is the Military Entrance Processing Station. And in the Navy, it's where you go pick the job that you're going to do if you're going to be enlisted. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to be a PH, which is a photographer's mate, basically taking pictures and that sort of thing, or a JO, which is a journalist. And that was my passion when I was in high school. I was on the high school newspaper. I was on the yearbook staff. I had taken photography 2 years in a row. I loved doing the job. I loved doing, you know, that sort of thing. And then when I got to MEPS and told the classifier, the person who gave me the job, that, they said, oh, are you sure? Like, yeah. They said, are you really sure? Are you sure you don't want to be a sonar tech? And I said, I want to be a sonar tech.
Blessed, he used the force on you.
Damn it. So that's actually how I became a sonar tech. I didn't necessarily really want to be one coming out of the gate, but I had a good time.
Hey, it wasn't my first choice, but, I look back and I'm like, okay, minimal regret.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. There's nothing I would do differently.
Yeah. Wish I could say the same, but oh well. But, talking about journalists and everything, connected to this movie, what is your opinion, especially in America or, a free society that America claims to be? How important do you place journalists?
I think that they are called the Fourth Estate for a reason.
The what again?
The Fourth Estate?
Okay.
Without appropriate journalism, we would not know about Watergate. For example, it is enshrined in the First Amendment that Congress shall make no law. Congress shall make no law. That's funny. Anyway, freedom of the press was enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution because collectively the Founding Fathers realized that if there was not a free press to report on the goings-on of the government, good or bad, then it would be state-run media. And state-run media is just the spokesman for the government.
I believe George Orwell stated that journalism is everything they don't want you to hear. Everything else is public relations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that journalists nowadays get a very unfair shake because of the bad examples that you see in highly visible positions. This is a weird tangent conversation.
It's relevant to this and everything, and we'll bring it around.
Yeah, it is relevant because of the cynicism represented, in this movie in 2007 about the 60s and the 70s. So that cynicism has done nothing but grow. But going back to the point, there are so many journalists in America today, far less than there were before, but there's still many, who are working their butts off day after day trying to get a valuable story out to their readership. Now, they get overshadowed sometimes by the bad examples or the one time that a writer, a columnist, will cite the wrong source or make a mistake. People will jump all over them and say, look, see, this is the example of why they suck. Like, look, understand they're human and they make mistakes. True practical journalism is going to have mistakes because it's done by people. The important thing is doing exactly what I did earlier, which is owning up to that mistake and making the correction.
Yeah, I always find that's the double standard. Whenever it's like, well, the politicians they're doing really bad things. Oh, that's just because the media is embellishing it and everything. But the media themselves fall victim to that because it's like you said, one makes a mistake or you have a bad one, and everyone just jumps all over it, and that's what they focus on. The mistakes or the schlock journalist or, the Fox/MSNBC guy who's totally biased, who's just giving an opinion, not necessarily stating facts. It's like that's what they're going to focus on.
I didn't want to say addressing your Fox MSNBC, and I'm really happy to see you include both of those in there, because one of the things that I have always contended is if you watch Fox, MSNBC, CNN, the big three, in the evenings, you're not watching them for news, you're watching them for the opinion pieces. Because they speak about a news thing that happened, and then they get people to opine about it for the next 15 minutes, and then they move on to another thing. That's not news. No. That's analysis and opinion.
Yeah, but the thing about that I was going to say too is like the importance of journalism. In which case, not necessarily to counter what you said, to just kind of add and highlight even more. I think the reason why it was included in the First Amendment, along with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of grievances against the government and everything, because it was such an important thing for people's self-determination to find their own truth. You can't tell somebody what religion to follow because he's going to find his own truth. You can't tell somebody what news story to follow. He's got to find that on his own. Now, yeah, there's a thing about facts, everything like that, and you hope that I always contended that every right that you have has a corresponding responsibility.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the freedom of the press, you have a responsibility to listen and to listen to as many as possible to determine the facts and determine your truth. Now religion, I don't know if we can say facts or whatever, but I mean, still, you have to leave that self-determination up to the individual. You can't tell him what that is. You can't tell him, now you can present evidence and say, well, this is why I believe this way, or this is why I think this journalist is telling the truth and why this one is full of crap. You have to let somebody decide for themselves and everything. And I think to bring this full circle then, this movie portrayed the importance of that because they showed us both the thousands of people that called in with all this bogus information, the proto-social media on the radio talk show, the Zodiac calling in on that, to show that, okay, yeah, this was a forum, this information came out, but ultimately, it was the guys who did the actual fact checking, the guys who looked through the records and everything like that, the journalists who really dug deep and really put their lives on the line. That's the ones.
Yeah, the guys who did the grunt work.
Really came close to finding out who this really was. And I think that was one of the underlying themes that, I don't know, probably it'll fly under the radar for most people. But I think this one was a very pro-journalist. This is why it's important to have a free press, to have one that really puts an effort into finding the facts. Because they're the ones, like you said, that do the grunt work. I think that to me, is like I said, was an underlying theme that I think just not too many people pay attention to.
I have nothing to add. I think that was very well said. The shoes on the other foot, I don't have to add something. That's what that feels like.
Oh, that's what that feels like.
Yeah, actually, that was kind of where I wanted to go. So you want to talk about Zodiac a little bit? And the accuracies and inaccuracies of the movie versus the case, or?
Yeah. I mean, again, that was one of my notes, talking about just how well the actual murders were portrayed. I mean, I go to the third one at the lake, the couple picnicking, and where he actually walked up to him and everything. The description, the composite drawing done with him in his hood and everything like that, that was like to a T.
Yeah.
Almost. People really did their homework. The conversation, how relatively calm it was and what went down and how it ended. If anything, it really made the movie so much more impactful because if you were somebody who was like me who knew that, wow, it's like actually watching it happen.
Yeah, we got a bird's eye view of the Zodiac killer doing his Zodiac killer thing. And,
because there was a survivor, that the details are relatively accurate. He was able to give those details. And it wasn't just a speculation based on, well, this is what we found. We found them in this position and, the blood stains going this way and the blood spatter going that way and everything. No, it was actually somebody saying, it's like, yeah, this is the conversation we had. And this is what he sounded like.
Yeah, and the guy survived. Now, I will say that I had forgotten that there were murder scenes in this movie. I thought it was more about the actual investigation of the cases themselves. It's sort of, we got another call, we got to find the bodies or whatnot. So that part kind of, I don't want to say shocked me, but it was definitely something I wasn't exactly prepared for. Talking about the Zodiac killings, one of the things that I discovered in my research is there are literally tons of websites dedicated to this case. And I'm on one right now called zodiackiller.com that's been in existence since 1998, since the very beginnings of the internet as a thing that people embraced. And it's crazy. I mean, there's just so much stuff, that people have compiled, and they all sort of lead to basically the same thing. There's one page on the site that's dedicated completely to Arthur Lee Allen, and if you look at the pictures of him in 1967 and 1978 and then compare him to the actor that played him, there's a pretty marked resemblance, which is always cool. I do like when they get somebody who actually looks kind of like the person that they're portraying.
Yeah. It's funny is if you look at a picture of a younger Robert Graysmith, the author of the book, kind of has a Jake Gyllenhaal look about him.
Yeah. And I love that. That always makes me giddy when you watch the movie and then you see who they were playing in real life, you're like, oh wow, they do look alike. That's awesome.
Yeah, if you can get somebody who can act like him and look like him at the same time, all the better.
Yep. Because when you watch a historical movie about a character that you know and love, or at the very least you know, when you see them portrayed by someone who doesn't even remotely look like them, like, oh, that's kind of wrong. Doesn't feel right.
You know, one that really comes to mind talking about actors who didn't look like the characters they were portraying was Tom Selleck as General Eisenhower during the movie called Ike, Countdown to D-Day. And, as I said before, the special features on the DVD, they're trying to say it's not so important that he look like him as long as he catches the persona. And I'm like, no, looking like him really helps.
I never pictured Magnum P.I. in the World War II movie.
No, it took a little bit away, enough to where it wasn't even like the close enough feeling. It took a little bit away. Which, on the contrast of that, Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln,
they did a good job with that.
Yeah, and it's like, granted, we don't have recordings of Lincoln, but I'd like to think that that's how he sounded.
Yeah, you mean he didn't sound like he did in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Wow, you read my mind.
I know, it's a gift. I read your facial expressions. Again, for our listeners, we do this over a FaceTime call so we can see each other. And sometimes you can hear us wildly gesticulating with our hands. Yeah, so I agree. Sometimes it's important that they look like him. There are times, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are times when it is acceptable for the person portraying the character to not look like them much. Passing resemblance is fine. But in this movie, there were a number of the actors that looked very similar to the characters they were portraying. But like I said, there's plenty of websites. Although, circling back to that, one person who does not look like the composite sketches of the Zodiac killer is Ted Cruz, if you're familiar with that gentleman. Apparently there was an internet theory running around that he was the Zodiac killer. I don't see it. He doesn't look a thing like the drawings, but fake news.
Yeah, and everything pointed to the Zodiac being a highly intelligent and calculating individual. Yeah, not Ted Cruz. So
you're saying that's not Ted Cruz?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Nice. Yeah, I guess he tweeted something that had to do with the Zodiac killer. It's just one of those weird things. Like, why is it on a Google search do I get Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, populating my search field or my search results? But there you have it. Ted Cruz, not the Zodiac killer.
No. Yeah, it's a neat little talking about other characters. Detective Tashi, side by side with Mark Ruffalo in character. He's wearing the same big black bow tie. Again, good job. They look like they could be related.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do like about the movie, because I did the same thing you're talking about where you compared the pictures. And I think they did it at the end of the movie, if I recall correctly. But again, watching it on the internet with the advertisements, it was kind of I'm so glad this is over. Not the movie itself, just all of the torturous ads. They had the characters and the actors side by side. I like the little touches like the bow tie. They could have just put him in a regular tie, made him look like a regular 70s cop that you saw in anything, or even, the 50s and early 60s with Dragnet, that sort of thing, where it's just like, here's a jacket, here's a tie, shirt, blah, good. But no, they actually made the effort to try and capture the character that they were portraying, or the actual person they were portraying. I think that was a nice touch. But again, going to the fascination of Zodiac itself, I think this case, as I said earlier, and Jack the Ripper and any of the other unsolved cases hold, for lack of a better term, a special place in our collective minds, because they were in fact unsolved and we don't actually know who this person is. If you look at movies throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s and even today, Jack the Ripper is infused in many pieces of entertainment. I think I've spoken of this television show before, Babylon 5, science fiction television series that was on in the 90s. They used Jack the Ripper as a character in the show. It was the actual Jack the Ripper. They used Jack the Ripper in Star Trek, the original series, when Scotty was framed for murdering a woman. In fact, if I recall correctly, that was the appearance of the infamous green woman at the end of the Star Trek series, episodes, when they showed that on there. So it's lived on in popular culture, it's lived on in our hearts and minds, because, again, we'll never know who Jack the Ripper is, we'll never know who Zodiac is. So that's part of the fascination of that, but I think serial killers in general have captured our thoughts. I don't want to say our hearts because that would imply something, incredibly negative. I think that serial killers are popular because they represent an ununderstandable aspect of humanity. I don't think that it's abnormal for a person to, in passing, go, "Oh God, I wish I could just kill you right now." I'm not saying that, that's a thought that anyone would ever act on, but when you find out that people were doing these horrific acts that are so inhuman or unhuman because we don't understand it. Like, it's one thing to have a passing, we'll call it morbid fantasy, and quite another to know that someone lived their life doing this thing, killing people, and then to find out the psychology of what built that person. So, like the killers with a theme. We'll use Seven because we've used that example before. He had a theme. He had a motivation and sort of a statement in doing what he was doing. There was some psychology behind it, as opposed to just strictly a mass murderer who just runs around killing people. Zodiac had, I don't necessarily know that there was a psychology behind it aside from killing people. He seemed to kill couples. He killed individuals. He claimed murders that weren't his. But the thing that made him special was he taunted the police. And that was something that hadn't really been done before. At least not in the way that he did it.
Well, I was going to say, it's like Jack the Ripper was known for taunting the police. He sent letters. He gave them clues. It's like, but ultimately led to nothing. So I don't know if you can actually say the first. He's definitely a very contemporary or modern day example. He stands out. I'll give you that.
I think that was what I was more going for.
Yeah.
Was that sort of thing.
So, just to kind of respond to that, kind of add to it, in my experience, and this is my opinion, I think there's two major reasons why people adhere to serial killers, why they maintain this fascination, whether they want to call it morbid or what. The ones that stand out are either the unsolved ones, the ones that we're never going to know because it's like, we got to know. It's human nature. We got to know.
Yeah, like Jake Gyllenhaal's character. Yeah. I have to solve this problem.
Yeah, so, your Jack the Rippers, your Zodiacs, it's like, we don't know, so that's why we hear. The other ones, again, in my opinion, are the ones that we just can't understand. It's like, why did he do this? It's like, it's beyond our comfort zone, I should say. I shouldn't say beyond our understanding, because sometimes, and this is the other point I was going to make, is that sometimes it's like we understand them all too well. And I think that's why it's like why we call it a morbid curiosity, because sometimes they might be just a really uncomfortable reflection of ourselves. It's doing the things that we wish we could do. Because like you said, there's a lot of times that we say, God, I could just kill you. It's like, I just want to end you. But we're civilized people. We're law-abiding citizens. We would never do that. We are moral people, good God-fearing Americans. We would never do that unless you go to war, in which case you would commit all kinds of atrocities, but you're not the only one, so it's okay. Or if you're, quote-unquote, defending your home. Or exercising your Second Amendment rights, in which case you would have no problem shooting somebody in the face because you were defending yourself. And it's your right to do that. So that's okay. And I see that because in those situations, we don't treat them like the tragedies they should be. When you had the Texas governor, forgive me, I forget his name, who was campaigning for president, and he said, yes, my state executed 700 and so people. Everybody cheered. We cheer that on. When you have somebody who says, yeah, I shot an intruder in my house, we pat him on the back and we celebrate it. When you have police apologists who say, yeah, that guy mouthed off, or he could have been a crook and everything like that, they have absolutely no problem with somebody being gunned down in the back who was running from a police officer. You know, when it's just like, if we really didn't have like some kind of subterranean admiration, you know, none of those cases would be treated as they are. So that's why I think there's a fascination, because they're a very light, faint, uncomfortable reflections of ourselves, because we are capable of some very awful things.
I think you're on something, and I think that we all have some darkness within us. I think that's a fair statement. I think the comparison to wartime atrocities, and I am not justifying them. I'm really not. But there is a tremendous difference between the macro psychology and micro psychology. So the psychology of groups and the psychology of the individual. Because if you look at lynch mobs, for example, and I'm not going to talk about who they're lynching, that's irrelevant. Because the idea of the lynch mob is that you get a bunch of people who are generally fairly peaceful, you get them whipped up into a lather about whatever, and they will go off and do things that they would never do individually, or they would never do in small groups. But because they're feeding off the passion of the group, and they are, at times, many people are afraid to say, whoa, 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 what are we doing? Because part of it is you're caught up in the, I don't want to say excitement in a good sense, but you're caught up in the moment. You're caught up in the emotion.
Okay, you know, and I get what you're saying. You know, it's like peer pressure or mob mentality.
Yeah, mob mentality.
But you know, but that's the thing. You know, it's like, and again, this might not be a fair comparison, so forgive me if it seems a little off base, but you know, it's like that thing, you know, when you're in adolescence and you go to the party and everyone's the wallflower. Nobody wants to go out in the middle and dance, you know, because everyone's afraid, you know, it's like they don't want to make a fool of themselves and everything like that. But every once in a while you experience that one guy who just doesn't give two craps about anything, and he goes out there and he dances his heart off and everything, and everyone admires him. Man, he don't care, man. Look, he's crazy. Look at him, you know. And I think there's some genetic relationship to that, because, again, we don't commit these atrocities unless, like you said, there's a mob mentality. We go off to war and it's a bunch of soldiers and everything, and it's like, yeah, man, let's go beat the crap out of these guys because they're our enemy and everything like that, you know, and we feel good about it. Everything, yeah, it's a group mentality. When an individual does it, we're like, whoa, look at him, you know? And now, when in the subject of serial killers, yeah, most of us would be like, ooh, that's not right. But again, this fascination that we have, this obsession, these thousands of books, movies, fictionalizations, everything, fantasies that people have, that tells us, you know, that we don't entirely 100% denounce these people.
Again, I think it goes to what you had said earlier. It's an exploration of self.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't look at the darkest parts of the human psyche, you will never know, one, what people are capable of, and two, what benefits we receive from being in a collective group that doesn't do that. I used the line from, again, Babylon 5. I don't know why this is stuck in my head, but there's a line by one of the characters when she is talking about a generally peaceful society, and she says something to the effect, and I'm going to butcher the saying, but it's, we are at our best when we move together, and we are at our worst when we move together. And for a time, we all went mad. And there was an event in the show, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, the point is, we collectively as a society, if we all move forward with the same goals in mind, we can accomplish that goal. We put a man on the moon. We put several men on the moon. We also, and I don't say we, but we as human beings, have collectively murdered at times 20 million people, 12 million people, 6 million people. That's the worst of us and the best of us. But it was the collective that sort of allowed it to happen. And I'm not saying that serial killers give us a look at why some people allowed the Holocaust to happen, but it does go to the, I hesitate to use the word fascination because that has kind of a positive connotation.
No, but it's
why
accurate.
it holds our interest. Yeah, why it has such an impact on our understanding of the human condition. Because again, it is the darkest parts of our soul, and it goes back to what I'd said at the beginning of this section of the conversation. We all, I think anyway, I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions because there are exceptions to everything, but we all at some point think, God, I would just like to punch you right in the face. Just stop talking. And we could never understand why someone would just up and kill that person, or we watch the videos now on Facebook of the people who just up and pop somebody. There's one rolling around the internet now about some lady in a milkshake in McDonald's. I haven't even watched it because, quite frankly, I don't care. It's people acting stupid. Mm-hmm. I get it. But that shows that we individually are capable of doing these things and acting out in stupid ways. Now, here's we'll call it social justice warrior balancing effort.
Okay.
So we watch these videos of people acting a fool. We watch these movies about serial killers, and we see the bad examples. And I could go to the FBI database or FBI website right now, and from what I recall, there are 25 or so serial killers active in the United States at any one time. And that's an interesting statistic, but let's turn that around. Okay, there are 25 active serial killers. Let's just say that's a real number, 25 right now. There are 50 states. So that means that somewhere in half of those states, there's one. And the other aspect is, according to the last census, there are 330 million people in this country. That means that there are 329,999,975 Americans who are not serial killers. So, we always focus on this number like it's a thing, but we forget how many people are not doing it. So, as far as that goes, we look at these videos, going back to the videos, look at videos of people acting stupid and realize that, it's a very small percentage. Mm-hmm. It's just one, it makes the rounds and assaults us, which again, had it been on the radio, you could hear 10 different people on the radio in the 70s that were acting the fool and realize you're in a city of 1 million people. Like, okay, great. Maybe they're a representative sample, but still. So the point being is people think, I would like to punch this person in the face, or, oh, God, it would just be so easy to just kill you right where you stand, and they don't act on it. So seeing someone that does or that can kind of gives you that little bit of vicarious living. You're like, oh, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Well, no, not really. But the other aspect is, yeah, I think it, but I don't understand how you could act on it. So it puts things in perspective.
The thing, though, it's like that when you say that it's a very small percentage, very infinitesimal percentage who are serial killers, and the rest of us are not. I think the thing is, though, that the thing that people focus on kind of touches on another one of our bad behaviors, and it's a lot of that selfishness, because, you say there's maybe 25 out of 300 million plus people who aren't serial killers, but, you think, well, what are the odds of me being that one that he kills? Don't want it to be me. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to pass that fear on to others. We're going to exaggerate it.
Oh, that's why we don't pick up hitchhikers anymore.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you're saying, you're trying to say it's such a small number. Why do we care so much? And it's like, well, because that person doesn't want to be that one person.
No. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I'm not denying that. It is a scary thing because you don't know, could they all be concentrated in North Carolina right across the border from where I live?
Yeah. Yeah, here's my thing on that, though, is when you talk about the percentages and why we should care and everything like that. Right now, that's the thing I see when people of color, when they're victims of any kind of violence or somebody acting a fool. Like there was one about the guy in Canada who was harassing this individual in a supermarket, and he says, "You're a Muslim terrorist," and everything like that. And and I see the comments, people saying, what if he was a Muslim terrorist? What is this? And everything like that. It's like in one comment somebody said, it's like, look at him. He's in a hoodie and he's brown and he's got a beard. He could be a Muslim terrorist. Would you let him babysit your kids? And and the whole thing I'm thinking is like, again, if you look at the statistics, I don't want to say like nearly all because it makes it sound like I'm saying they all are. There's been a number of women, there's been a few individuals of color, but the vast majority of serial killers have always been white male. Vast majority. Like I said, there's a small percentage or anything. So, my thing is like, dude, who should we really be scared of if you're going to play that game? It's like, if you really want to pull that out, I mean, I can, call up some really nasty statistics that shows that brown people are not the ones we should be scared of.
I'm not a serial killer. I'm just letting you know.
Okay. All right. But
not for nothing. I wouldn't tell you even if I was, especially on something that's going on the internet. So, yeah. It's always the quiet ones. You never expect them.
Yeah, it's funny. George Carlin.
Yes.
Brought that up once, and it was like, it's always the quiet ones, really? Because it's like, if there's a guy at the end of the bar with a machete going, I'm going to kill this MF that walks in here, who are you going to look at?
Fair enough.
No, but, like we were saying, though, I seriously think that, like I said, the dark reflection of ourselves is what keeps our fascination. It's the guy that you want to say that would never be me. But I don't know. I kind of subscribe to the jokers. It's like gravity. All you need is just a little push. Was it in The Killing Joke when he said, all you need is one bad day?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for quoting The Killing Joke, which, by the way, not on my shelf. Garbage animation. The graphic novel was so much better.
Yeah, I didn't see I had high hopes for the animated movie, but then I heard the bad reviews, and I just said, you know what? I'll just stick with the graphic novel. It was so good. Sorry, Mark Hamill.
I will say I watched it, and the parts where they stuck to the graphic novel story were great, but there were parts like, you did not need that piece of the movie in there. That made no sense, and it does not belong there, and it was weird.
Yes.
So, without spoiling the movie, because one day I might own it, because I'm stubborn like that. I do like DC's animation. I'm weird. I don't know why. But, yeah, so, did you want to talk more about serial killers? Brand muffins, anything else?
I think that there's a danger that we can go on forever talking about them, because I'm going to start citing others, and I don't think we want to go there. Talk about rabbit hole.
And not for nothing, this case has been going on for 40, nearly 50 years, and we're still talking about it. People are still talking about it. Jack the Ripper was how long ago? Yeah, we're still talking about that.
1888. Yeah. He showed up in Assassin's Creed. That's how famous he is. I don't think even he would have ever imagined that he would be a part of a video game franchise such as that.
Yeah. I find it intriguing again that it does wend its way into all aspects of popular culture.
Yeah. In fact, Zodiac did make his way into another Ubisoft title, Watch Dogs 2, which took place in San Francisco. Although the story took a little twist. It wasn't, not spoiling too much, but it wasn't the actual Zodiac, but something more sinister.
Yeah. The other piece I was going to add is I'm not sure that two guys on a podcast that have done minimal research into the actual crime, I mean, comparatively speaking, are actually going to provide any solution. Like, oh, yeah. I will say that in the movie, they made a compelling case that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac killer, and to include the piece at the end after he died. Graysmith never got any phone calls, no more heavy breathing phone calls, and quite frankly, that would creep the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the setting the period piece, those weird coily, wiry things that were attached to that device that they spoke into.
You were talking about a telephone. We get it, okay? We're old, all right? It's established.
Yeah, but that being said, where would you put this on your shelf?
Well, initially it had a spot in general population, but watching this again, I don't know, just kind of a renewed appreciation for it. And I just might put it in the special movies, a little section where I call like my Hitman movies. They're just kind of special. I just might include serial killers with my Hitman movies and everything. Okay. So if I find other gems like that, I think, So I think what we're witnessing is something different, that we've actually moved a movie from one spot to another.
Moved a movie out of general population. Did you hear that, listeners? That was a thing that just happened.
Dun dun dun.
I don't own this movie, and I'm not sure that I'm going to. Not because I don't like it. I enjoyed the movie, and I actually enjoyed the de-evolution of Jake Gyllenhaal's character as he became more and more obsessed with the Zodiac, and the de-evolution of Robert Downey Jr.'s character as he became more and more concerned for his life and wrapped around that axle. But I think that ultimately, if I did own this movie, I would put it just maybe at the beginning of in the top 70% of the second shelf.
Okay.
It's a good movie. It's well made. As I had mentioned earlier, the quasi-grainy quality of the film lends itself to the era. The little things here and there that make it feel like it's set in the 70s and kind of gives you that feel. I think it's a great movie. I like the music and the way it's woven into the movie. From an emotional standpoint, I have movies that I care for more. And from a movie-making standpoint, I kind of think it was just all right. I think there are a few things that they probably could have done a little bit better. But it was a good, solid movie. And it's ahead of general population, which I would consider like the third shelf. So
okay, I do say that I bought the special edition because I remember even then when I first saw it, I knew this movie was special. But I gotta say though, when I looked at the special features, as far as special features go, especially in a case like this, they're a little lackluster. The documentaries were not as good as I thought they could be there because there's been some good documentaries on the Zodiac Killer. I think they could have included them and they didn't.
Well, it's all about rights.
Yeah, true. So a little disappointment there as far as the Blu-ray special edition, but hey, still a good movie.
Okay, so real quick, while we're talking about the Blu-ray and the actual physical media itself, did the Blu-ray maintain that sort of grainy quality, or did they high def it up?
No, I think they maintain a little bit of the grainy quality.
Okay.
Which they can do that, and they did. I did not get a feel that this was artificially high def.
That's good, because I think
like
it would have pulled me out of the movie. I kind of like watching, for lack of a better term, we'll call it a period piece, in a way that makes it feel like the period, if you know what I'm saying. So, yeah. All right, cool. Well, shall we find out what's next?
Let's do it.
Alrighty then. Next up on the hit parade, hitting the magic random movie generator button.
Shrek 2.
Ooh, Shrek 2.
Fair enough.
Well, interestingly enough, it's our first non-Disney animated movie.
Okay.
I think it'll be fun.
Okay.
So there.
All right. There we go.
All right, listeners, if you liked what you heard, if you want to add your own feedback about Zodiac, email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. Check us out on the Facebook page or check us out on Twitter. Yo, we tweet. That's what we do. And we will see you. Actually, we'll say goodbye right after Dan gives us a movie-themed goodbye. Hello? Hello? Who is this? Okay, I'm hanging up now. We'll see you in 2 weeks with Shrek 2. Goodbye.